Good to see everybody this morning. And we're going to be jumping right into our series in the book of James. James chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. Just those two verses this morning. I want to say again, welcome to everybody. If you're our first-time guest or VIP guest, make sure you get signed up for Encounter Connect. Make a new friend. Grab some great food and have some good laughs. And church family, we just want to say thank you for your faithfulness again. Let me reiterate what they've said. And we, a lot of churches with the insurance market all over the country right now, some of them are having to close their doors. Some not-for-profit ministries are shutting down because the insurance market for not-for-profits all over the country and bakeries and all kinds of stuff is collapsing. And so because of your faithfulness, we did have that contingency fund. And now contingency funds wiped out between that, and we had to go ahead and a year early and put the last half of the roof on in the south end of the building. But praise God that we had it to do that. And I am so ready for the grand opening. Did you get, what was the date of the grand opening? What was that, October what? 27th, there you go. Yeah, thank you. So James chapter 1, we love you. Let's get into God's Word. And I think you're going to want to take notes today. Make sure you have the note page because I do have a diagram on your notes that you're going to want to take home with you and probably stick in a prominent place so you can be reminded. Let's read this together, verse 19 and then into verse 20. Everybody out loud. Here we go. My brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. So today, part 2 of the series Community, I want to ask this question. How can you stay close to the people that you love? How can you stay close through the course of time with the people that you love? Well, James says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Why? Because your anger will not produce the righteousness, the blessings, the stick-to-itness in your relationships that God desires for you. So let's put it in the context of marriage. How does a man and woman stay close in marriage to one another so that by the time you get to the end of your life, most of your life as you look back is going to be a very blessed and joy-filled experience with one another? How do you do that? How do you do that with your friendships, with your fellow students? You see, intimacy, closeness, deep friendships, deep companionship is all directly proportional to how close you can stay to one another throughout your life so that you can feel loved, laugh together, enjoy life together to the fullest. So welcome to message number 2, community, because life is always better together. And let's dive in and answer the question, how can I stay close throughout my life to the people that I love? Number 1, you have to allow conflict. Catch this. You have to allow conflict to create closeness rather than distance. You have to allow that. You got to humble yourself and allow conflict to create closeness rather than distance, All of us every single day, we have disagreements. Some small spats, some fights, and some even angry disagreements and misunderstandings that can evolve into what we can consider is a cultural war in our relationships. Why? Because people have different backgrounds. People's life experiences are different. People's perspectives are different. Each person has that unique set of values, if you will, and they carry all these things, these differences into every relationship that they have. And it's our differences that make conflict inevitable. It's just inevitable. I know that my wife and I, we fight. I know that may surprise you, but we fight, and we fight well. Sometimes I wonder if my neighbors can hear us, because our neighbors are kind of close in our neighborhood. Us raising our voice to one another, at least me raising my voice, because my voice carries a little bit better than hers. But we fight. But early on in our marriage, we determined that we were going to set some boundaries so that we could fight in a healthy way. So that I could get angry with her and she could get angry with me and we would not sin. But our anger would motivate us to be passionate enough to make a change or to listen. What does James say? He says, be slow to speak, right? Quick to listen, and slow to become angry, right? And so conflict can be used to bring you closer, but our differences make conflict inevitable. I mean, come on, she grew up where money was made to be spent. And you grew up where money was meant to be saved, right? She grew up where there was a place for everything, and you grew up where everything has its place. She grew up with expensive tastes. I mean, to her, labels matter. And you grew up with clearance sales taste, always buying what's cheapest, right? She grew up charging it, and you grew up paying cash for everything. I mean, she grew up a hugger, right? And you grew up a handshaker. She grew up always late. You grew up always on time. I mean, she grew up in a church where the people raised their hands and they shouted and they clapped. And you grew up in a church where it was really, really quiet and people just shook hands. They would never shout or never clap or raise their hands, much less, right? And in church, you just kind of quietly sat there hoping that you could get out alive, right? She grew up, with her extended family every Christmas meeting at mom's house. And you grew up where Christmas, you just wanted it at your house and you just wanted to be all alone. You see, our differences make conflict inevitable, and our differences create conflict. So the question is not, will there be conflict? No. The question is, how do I make conflict work for us rather than work against us? How do we do that? That's the question. Well, first thing is your goal must be to understand one another. It must be to understand that friend that you have, or that bride or that spouse that you have. The goal's got to be to understand that other person, not to win the argument. The goal can't be to convince them that you're right and they're wrong, and your way is right and their way is wrong. What did Pastor James say? He said, be quick to what? Listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry, right? Right? But when our goal is to win the argument or convince someone that you're right and that they're wrong, what happens is you drive one another further apart. It's only when your goal is to understand the other person and you come to the place in your life where you're mature enough to begin desiring peace. So now your goal is to understand them and therefore begin to create dialogue with them. Dialogue with them. A long time ago, a guy named Dr. Phil McGraw, you would know him as Dr. Phil, wrote this in a book. He said, in all the years that I've worked with couples, the most common goal of each person was not to find out how to live a better life, better relationships, how to behave properly. No. That was never their goal. Very rarely was the goal. He goes on to say, but their goal was to convince me, the therapist, that what they were believing or what they were doing was correct. He goes on in his writing, he says, seldom did either partner come to me and sincerely say, oh, Dr. Phil, I want our marriage to work no matter who's right. He goes on to write, what both of them usually said was, Dr. Phil, I want you to recognize that I'm right. And then convince my friend or my spouse that I'm right so we can do things my way. Over the 40 years that I've been a pastor, I've had hundreds of people in my offices listening to them over and over and over. And the majority of the time, what I'm hearing is them accuse one another of all sorts of things. And when I read what Dr. Phil wrote some years ago, I said to myself, you know what? What he wrote has been my exact experience. I have found for most people in conflict, it's much more important for them to be right, to win the argument, to defend their viewpoint, their way. It's more important for them to be right than for their relationship to work, no matter who is right. And over again, I've watched marriages disintegrate, friendships disintegrate, while they try to hold on to their point to win the argument rather than work out the relationship in order to win a lifetime together, staying close and staying in love. You see, everyday conflict can work. It can work to bring you closer to one another, closer to those you love, rather than allowing it to push you further apart. Conflict can work for you rather than work against you. And with this in mind, I want to take a look at what's called the cycle of conflict. If you have a note sheet, and I encourage you, always grab notes out of the note holder thing on your way in. But you're going to probably want to take this and maybe cut the bottom half off and put it on your mirror in the bathroom or your dresser or the refrigerator. Because every day there's going to be some level of conflict in your life. It's inevitable. And this will help you to remember how to, in a healthy fashion, a God-honoring fashion, use conflict to create closeness in your friendships and in your marriage, okay? Here we go, let's start. It always starts with a conflict. Every day, small ones, big ones, medium-sized ones, ongoing ones, short ones. But it starts at the top, conflict. And what inevitably happens is, at some point in the conflict, there are hurt feelings. My feelings are hurt. I can't. Did you hear what he said to me? Can you believe what she was doing? Hurt. And the longer you allow that hurt to fester, the more angry you're going to become, the more frustrated you're going to become. And so these are the natural results of conflict. The natural results. If you're not a spiritual, spirit-filled person that's meeting with the Lord and trying to follow the Lord, you're not perfect. But if you've not given over the way you think about things and learned how Jesus thinks, and you replace your thoughts with how he thinks, your natural response is to become hurt and angry. And when you're in that place, that natural choice, there's two decisions you can make. See those two choices? Arrow goes this way, arrow goes that way. One is you can flee, withdraw, continue to let the problems fester and build. And that only escalates isolation, further distance apart from that friendship or that marriage, that spouse. You can do that, and I'm going to tell you what, men, guys, we are so good at this. We are so good at fleeing, withdrawing from the conflict, getting away from the conflict. And when men do this a lot of times, I mean, women do it too, but what they do is they stew in silence, and they think they're going to punish the one that they love with their silence. A man will just walk around and not say anything. He's just stewing. He may kick the cat a little bit and then go on over and sit down, and his wife might ask him something. He just kind of mumbles something back. And men often try to punish the one they love through their silence. But instead, you're just pushing them further away, not drawing them closer. So this is the wrong choice in your friendships and in your marriages. It's the wrong choice. But it is the choice that many people initially make. They choose to flee the conflict, withdraw from the conflict. And for a while, I know when I do this, for a while, I think, man, I'm scoring some points on my side. I'm winning, right? But if you really think it through, not just react emotionally to it, but respond responsibly according to healthy biblical truth, you think it through, you're just pushing people away. You're not drawing them closer. And all it does is escalate the conflict into more isolation. And I've got to confess, I'm good at this. In fact, I'm really good at this in my marriage. And sometimes when I look back over the 40 years that I've been married and they've been 40 great years, but as I look back, there's times I'm ashamed that sometimes I allow conflict to keep me silent for a week. I've gone a whole week before just doing. Some people go months, some people go years, some people, it's been half their marriage. So some people stew in their friendships, on their bowling teams, on their ball teams, on their sewing clubs, on their activities and the groups they hang out with, or their social groups. They stew on social media. And all they're doing is escalating the conflict and pushing everybody apart into isolation. You can flee, withdraw from the conflict, or you can choose to face the conflict. These are your two choices. In your frustration, you can either flee, withdraw, and let the problems fester and let isolation escalate, or you can choose to face the conflict. Eventually, people do choose to face the conflict, but it's how you choose. It's how you face it. And that brings up two more choices. You determine you're going to face the conflict. I'm going to turn around and come back and face the conflict. But how are you going to face it? I mean, how you face it matters. It matters. Face the conflict. Some choose to face the conflict by choosing to fight, because you've got a goal to win the argument, to defend your viewpoint. And so you go back to your wife or your friend and you say, we're going to talk about this. Come on. You're not going to get away from me. We're going to talk about this. But then in talking about it, what they really mean is they're going to accuse you. They're going to make demands of you. They're going to put you down. They're going to denigrate you, because their goal is to get you to admit that they were wrong and you were right. I am in it to win it. That's the attitude. So you can go back and face the conflict with an in it to win it attitude. It's not going to help. It's not going to help. It's not a healthy step. So as you all found out, all that does is, again, escalate the conflict. So what starts as a little spat now grows into a much bigger war. In both decisions, to fight or to flee or fight, they're unhealthy choices in relationships, right? In fact, fleeing or fighting is what I call unhealthy exit ramps, and you can see that in the diagram. If you're going to flee, you get out of the cycle and off to the side. It's an exit ramp of the process. And if you're going to choose to fight, you see that arrow going down there? Fight, accusing, demanding, putting down, denigrating in order to win. It just escalates the conflict as well. And it's an exit ramp out of the process of allowing conflict to create closeness. To create closeness. So some of you think I'm absolutely off my rocker. But many of you in this room, in a little while, are going to feel exactly what I'm talking about. And you're going to know, oh yeah, that's true. I have experienced what he is talking about. So what is the more healthy choice? What's the best choice? It's not taking the exit ramp of flight or fight at all. The better choice is to be, as James says, be what, church? Quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry, right? But what does this look like? It looks like when you kind of pull back, hit the pause button, and are no longer reactionary emotionally. In other words, you become responsible emotionally, right? And you pull back, you recognize the goal is no longer to flee or to fight to win the argument. My goal is no longer to defend my viewpoint. No. It becomes a healthy goal, not a naturally minded goal, but a spiritually minded goal, the mind of Christ. And the goal moves forward into creating a dialogue. The goal is not to fight. The goal is not flight. The goal is to stay there and create a dialogue. Create a dialogue. Inviting the other person or persons into that conversation. A dialogue, not a monologue, not a diatribe, a dialogue where there's give and take. And here's the key. And this is the good part. When you allow yourself to move past the hurt and the frustration and the anger, and you begin making the spiritually healthy choice to understand the person through an ongoing dialogue with them, you're now stepping out of the way. And you're opening up the door for God. You're giving now God an opportunity to step into that situation, because your mind's not all scattered with distractional thoughts and the anger and the frustration and the hurt. See, when you're so wrapped up into that kind of stuff, it's hard for God to break into your thoughts. It's when you learn to hit the pause button and are quick to listen to God, slow to speak and become slow to get angry, what happens is you're now giving God the opportunity to step in now that you're out of the way and solve the problem, resolve the conflict. This is when conflict creates its best work in us and through us. Do you hear what I just said? This is at the point when conflict can begin working its best work in us and through us. God does great things in the lives of people who refuse to take the exit ramps of flight or fight. He does great things in the lives of people who choose to try and talk it out to understand the other person. Because out of conflict comes forgiveness. Out of conflict comes compromise. Out of conflict comes relational and spiritual growth. Out of conflict comes a deeper camaraderie. Out of conflict, especially in a marriage, comes a deeper appreciation and a deeper respect for one another. I've been married 40 years. As of last June, we finished 40 years. As I said, my wife and I fight. Some seasons we fight a lot. Some seasons we don't fight a lot. But we set up boundaries early on. There's certain words we do not allow to be said to one another. I'll be honest with you, one of those words was divorce. Before we ever got married, we committed to one another that would not be a word in our language. That we were going to stay no matter what. We're going to stay no matter what. Because if God can raise Jesus from the dead, out of that grave, He's got the power to stay with us through our difficulties, no matter what we face, and make beauty out of ashes. And we want that story. We want to be impactful in our lives and other people's lives. And so conflict. I loved her when I put a ring on her finger, but 40 years later, I can truly, honestly tell you I love her so much more. Because the conflict and the fights that we've had has grown in us such a deep appreciation for one another, such a long-lasting respect for one another, such a love for one another. 40 years in, we can almost finish each other's sentences now. It has forged a oneness there. But it's because, not all the time, but as we've gotten older, most of the time, we don't take the exit ramps. We create dialogue. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. I want to give some very practical things to you. So conflict can either grow you closer together or it can force you further apart. You can flee or you can fight, or you can move through the cycle of conflict in a healthy fashion and allow conflict to bring you closer together, because life is always better together. It's the wise small group of friends who learn how to resolve conflict quickly and in a healthy way. It is the wise couple who learns how to resolve conflict quickly and in a healthy way. It's the wise church who learns how to resolve conflict quickly and in a healthy way. It brings people together. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, the Apostle Paul pleads with us, and he says, do not let the sun go down on your anger. Earlier in that passage in Ephesians chapter 4, he says, now you can be angry. It's not wrong to be angry, right? Anger's not something you can always avoid. We get angry at times, we get frustrated at times. Conflict is inevitable. But when anger comes, when frustration comes, the Apostle Paul pleads with us to not let the sun go down on your anger. One of our boundaries was to make sure that every night that we had a conversation if it was necessary. We were not going to let the sun go down. And we have these boundaries that has pushed us closer to one another rather than pulled us further apart. So you can allow conflict to create closeness rather than isolation. But here's the key. You have to want resolution. You have to want that better relationship more than you want to win the argument, more than you want to convince them they're wrong and you're right. So, first, if you want to be able to love people and stay close to them for the rest of your life, number one, you've got to allow conflict to create closeness, not distance. Number two, you've got to build weekly, monthly, and yearly habits into your marriage. Weekly, monthly, and yearly habits. Now, we're talking specifically about marriage now, but this will work in friendship circles as well. In marriage, the feelings of love can fade. It takes a few years, but they can fade if they're not tended to. And at first, in marriage, you begin using the words we. Well, we're going to go to the movies together. Or we're going to go to the ball game together. Or we're going to go see mom and dad together. Or we're going to go see, so we. We're going to do these things together. It's we. We always use the word we. But after a decade or so passes, a lot of times we start using the word I. Hey, I'm gonna go watch the ball game with my friends, and well, I'm gonna go take the kids to their dance lessons. And pretty soon, I'm gonna hit this meeting after work, and I'm gonna take the kids over here, and now pretty soon they're her kids, and he's doing his thing, and it's I, and she's doing her thing, and it's I with her kids. That's the natural default if we don't intentionally, proactively pour into one another by building weekly, monthly, and yearly habits into our marriage. Otherwise, we take love for granted. So here's a couple questions you may want to write down. A couple great questions to ask each other in your marriage once a month, once a quarter. Number one question. Do you feel close to me? Do you feel close to me? And the second question is, do I feel close to you? I mean, those of you that are married, you ought to ask this or something like this every quarter at least. Hey, do you feel close to me? And if the answer is not a hearty yes, then mark it down. Take note of it. You've got some dialoguing to do. You need to get away on a weekly, monthly, or yearly extravaganza and do some dialoguing, right? You got some dialoguing to do. So let me give you 3 habits that will guarantee closeness throughout your life, especially in your marriage. Number 1, weekly escapes to become your communication connectors. Now, the reason why I put escapes there in your notes is because that's exactly what it is. It's not being with friends. It's not being with the kids. It's not being in an activity. It's you and your spouse being alone, just alone. And it has to be weekly. It has to be. Every week you have to have some aloneness just together, just the two of you, to catch up with one another and process life together every week. It meets a couple huge needs as well in your lives. In a lady's life and a wife's life, often they have a big need for conversation, right? And in a husband's life, it meets the need to be able to pour into his wife so she has the security and he has the respect. And you can't do this unless you're communicating. And you're not going to communicate. You're going to get defaulting where you just start distancing from one another because of the culture ripping you apart, the expectations tearing you apart, pushing you away from one another. You have to intentionally schedule it every week, a weekly habit. Number 2 habit, monthly. So we talk about weekly communication connectors. Monthly experiences become your companionship keepers. Now this Tuesday night after I get finished with my piano lessons teaching, Bitsy and I are going to head out. And we'll be gone Tuesday night, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we'll be coming back Saturday. We haven't done this in so long. I mean, we've done it with kids and grandkids and stuff, but just the two of us. And we used to do this every year, a couple times a year, go to like Orange Beach, and we'd take 10 books with us, and I'd read a book, and she'd read a book, and when we're done with that, then we'd swap, and we'd work through about 10 books for that week. But that presents a framework from which we can have conversation together. And we used to set our whole next year's goal for the next 12 months. If we're in July or if we're in September or something, we'll set from October all the way through the next September our goals, and we'll talk about those goals and what we're going to help pour into each other's lives and our kids' lives and how they're doing. And it creates monthly, weekly communication connections, and then monthly companionship keepers. It keeps you close. It keeps you as a companion, camaraderie. It builds and pours into one another. So weekly communication connectors and then monthly companionship keepers. In doing these habits, you'll combat the selfishness that tries to creep into all of our relationships over time, especially marriages. That selfishness that'll creep in and begin separating the spouses. The couple that plays together, it's a true statement. The couple that plays together often really does stay together. But if you sacrifice your playtime in marriage, your time to set aside to communicate and connect in companionship and conversation, then you're setting yourself up for failure in the second most important relationship of your life. So habit number 1, you have weekly escapes that become your communication connectors. Habit number 2, you have monthly experiences that you create that become your companionship keepers. And last, habit number 3, yearly extravaganzas that become your shared memory makers, My wife and I did not get to celebrate our 40th anniversary this year because we were celebrating stuff with grandkids and kids all throughout the summer. We're trying to. And so next year, we're setting it aside a couple weeks to try to do something we've never done before and go extravagant with one another and go maybe to Greece or something like that. We've never done anything like that before, maybe Hawaii. I can't tell you how much I look forward to that. I can't tell you how much she looks forward to that after 40 years of marriage. By then it'll be 41 years of connecting and communicating and pouring into one another in companionship, and then having a yearly extravaganza where we make memories, shared memories together. Shared memories together. The thing about memories is when they're brought back up, and they're shared between the husband and wife, and they're talking about those memories. What that does in that conversation is you begin reliving those moments that you're talking about in those memories. And when you're doing that, it begins infusing energy into your relationship. Because the culture wants to suck the life out of the relationship, and you've got to pour energy back in. And one of the ways to do it is to take and create shared memories on these yearly extravaganzas, or even the weekly times of communicating, or the monthly times of deepening your companionship. And you talk about those times. And sometimes the hair stands up on the back of your head and you get goosebumps. Sometimes you weep again all over because of the shared memories that you had together. I know small groups of men who've been together for a while, and they've walked through hell and back, staying together. And when they have those shared memories and they bring them up in their group, there's men who break down and begin crying because of the appreciation and the depth that they have for one another, that the conflicts have created in them. I know couples in their 80s that have been married for more than 50 years, that they still have the sparkle in their eyes, one towards the other. And you can just tell how much they love one another because they have taken the conflicts that are inevitable and they've allowed them to create closeness. And they've taken the weeks and the months and the years and they've used them to communicate, to pour into companionship, and to create shared memories together. There's one other thing I want to talk about in our last couple minutes here. So we talked about creating space, allowing conflict to create closeness. We've talked about taking it and guarding, or we talked about weekly, monthly, and yearly events to keep communicating, companionship, etc. Last one is guard your heart. You got to guard your heart against resentment, because it can creep in. Colossians chapter 3, verse 19, God writes to us, he tells us, husbands, and I for the life of me still today don't know why he didn't write wives. Or why did he just at least say husbands and wives? But for some reason he wrote, husbands, do not become embittered, that means resentful, against your wives. And I've always wondered, why did God think it was necessary to tell us men not to become resentful or bitter against our wives? Well, maybe men are just more demanding in their relationships than their wives. Could be. Maybe they're more demanding. Maybe it's because a man gets more quickly angry often and stews longer. I don't know why. The Bible doesn't necessarily detail that out. But to keep your relationship vibrant with those you love, every person needs to ask this question. And you may want to write this down and ask your friends or your spouse, if you're married, this question this afternoon. What growing resentment am I carrying towards the people I love? You got to ask yourself that question. What growing resentment am I carrying towards those I love? That's a really healthy question. It gives you self-awareness. And if you study the rest of this passage, it talks about self-awareness. And you got to get there. You got to learn and mature so you can look at yourself and not hide behind this facade, what you present yourself to be. No. You can learn who you are so you can have self-awareness so that you can actually be honest and ask yourself, God, what growing resentment do I have towards those I love, my friends, people I serve with at my church, my spouse? That's a great question. Did you know that lots of research, clinical studies tell us that of all the human emotions, resentment and bitterness are the two most powerful and the two most destructive. You start harboring resentment and bitterness, even if it's justifiable, and it's going to wreck your life. It's going to project from you, and you may not even aware of it, destruction. It'll ruin you. It's like spewing poison out onto everything and everyone that's around you. You see, resentment is a cancer to closeness. It's a cancer to closeness. It eats it up. So how do you guard your heart to make sure that you can go the distance in your relationships, especially your marriage? How do you keep resentment from creeping in? Number one, look inside yourself and check your temperature towards those you love. Check the temperature of your heart towards those you love. Number two, write your resentment down. Write it down in what we call I statements. Write it down in an I statement. Here's what I mean. Instead of saying this, look at this Visa bill, I can't believe it. Look at this. You're a financial first grader. Are you really trying to bankrupt us? I mean, come on now. You can start that way if you want. Or you can be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry and sit down in a calmer moment, not reacting emotionally, but responding emotionally responsibly. Quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to be angry, and write your resentment out in an I statement and just simply say, honey, let's sit down. You know, I'm very uncomfortable with how we're budgeting our money, how we're spending our finances, and we need to talk about it. That's a much better way of entering into that dialogue, right? Or you can say, you don't care about me. All you care about is your job and your work and your team. I'm working my tail off here, and you never spend any time with me anymore. You can start there if you want, or you can be quick to, what is it, church? Quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, right? You can start there and be responsible emotionally instead of reactionary emotionally. And in a calmer moment, you can say, write your I statement about that resentment. You know, honey, I need your support. It's an I statement. Honey, I need your support. I mean, I've been feeling all alone. It's an I statement. You resent it. You're writing it down. I've been feeling all alone. I need you. You're taking your resentment and writing it down in a statement using you as I. So check the temperature of your heart towards those you love. Write resentment down in an I statement. Number 3, and lastly, communicate your I statements during those weekly, monthly, yearly times together. Communicate your I statements. Create a dialogue. Open the dialogue up with those I statements. Pastor James pleads with us, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness in your life, the blessings in your life, the character development in your life, the mentorship in your life, the blessings in your life, the growth in your life, and the peace in your life that God so desires for you and for me. Let's all stand and bow our heads, and now it gets real. So all stand and bow our heads. Every eye closed, every head bowed, please. The most important time of the entire morning, nobody moving around. If you're here and your spouse is here with you, I would just encourage you to reach down and take their hand. If you're here and your fiance is here with you, reach down and take their hand. If your girlfriend or boyfriend, reach down and take their hand. Let me first ask you, what conflicts are you experiencing right now in your life? What conflicts are you experiencing today? Be honest about it. You and the Lord. You and the Lord. Second question I want to ask you. Have you been allowing resentment to creep into the relationships that you have with those that you love the most? What level of resentment is active in your mind and in your heart? Have you allowed it to creep into your relationships, into your marriage? And last questions with hands held if they're here with you. Last question. Do you feel close to me? And I would encourage you, if you're here with your spouse or your fiance, that you would turn to them and ask them that question just right now. Softly whisper it. Hey, do you feel close to me? And let that question open up a dialogue over lunch today or this afternoon where you can get by yourself and get alone, just two of you, and can begin scheduling those weekly, monthly, yearly times to pour into one another so that you can begin allowing the conflicts that you're walking through, because they're inevitable, to begin creating a closeness in your relationship, a depth of appreciation for one another, a depth of respect, a deeper respect, and a much deeper love. Many of you have done this. You've matured to the point where you can be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. And you would testify to these younger people today that, oh, it's so worth it. It's so worth it. The depth of relationship, the richness in my marriage is so worth it. And the model that we become to our kids and our grandkids, it is so worth it. Now, before we sing our final song, there's some of you that it's not that you're in conflict with a spouse or a friend or someone in your life. It's that you're still in conflict with God. You've yet to make peace with God. You've yet to make peace with God. Romans chapter 5 verse 1 says, therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Well, have you been justified as faith? Have you believed in Jesus so that you're justified? That word means just as if I've never fallen short on anything, just as if I've never sinned, and therefore I can have a relationship with my Creator, my Father, and have peace with Him. Have you come to peace with God through what Jesus did on the cross and who He is? Or are you still fighting? Are you still fleeing? You can have peace today. It's the greatest decision you'll ever make. Father, I pray today that if someone needs to make that greatest decision of life today, to surrender life to you, to believe in you, so they can have peace with God, that it would happen today. In Jesus' name we pray. Let's sing, y'all.